At the heart of a bustling international airport, amidst the hum of travelers and the rhythmic announcements over the intercom, a scene was about to unfold that would ripple through the lives of everyone involved. It was just another day for most people rushing to catch their flights, businessmen in sharp suits, families with kids tugging at backpacks, and solo travelers lost in books or music. But for two individuals, this day would become unforgettable. The first person stepped out of the crowd, a tall man with an air of authority, his polished leather shoes clicking against the tiled floor. He carried himself like someone who was used to being in charge, someone who expected things to go his way without question. His tailored suit and expensive watch hinted at wealth, but it was the confidence radiating from him that truly set him apart. This was a man who ran companies, signed million-dollar deals, and rarely faced resistance in any form. Today he was simply trying to board his flight after a grueling morning spent navigating high-stakes negotiations in a corporate boardroom. He reached the gate, handed over his boarding pass, and waited for the usual nod from the attendant, the one that signaled everything was in order. First class, aisle seat, no fuss. That's how it always went. But today, something felt off. The attendant glanced at the screen, then back at him, her brow furrowing slightly. She hesitated before speaking. "Sir," she began cautiously, "there seems to be an issue." An issue? Those two words hit him like a jolt. What kind of issue could possibly exist in his meticulously planned life? He leaned closer, demanding clarification. The attendant explained haltingly that somehow there had been a mix-up with the seating assignments. Another passenger, someone already seated in what should have been his spot, had been mistakenly given his reservation. Now normally such a situation might have been resolved quickly with a polite apology and a swift rearrangement. But when the man walked down the jet bridge and saw who occupied his seat, his irritation turned into disbelief. There, sitting calmly by the window, was a woman who didn't fit the image of someone likely to cause trouble. She looked middle-aged, dressed neatly in a blouse and blazer, her posture relaxed yet commanding. Her dark skin contrasted sharply with the crisp white pages of the book she was reading. She seemed completely unfazed by the commotion around her. Without missing a beat, the man approached her. "Excuse me," he said firmly, not bothering to mask his impatience. "This is my seat." The woman looked up slowly, meeting his gaze with an expression that was neither intimidated nor apologetic. "Is it?" she replied coolly, arching an eyebrow. "Because according to my boarding pass, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Her tone wasn't confrontational, but it carried a quiet strength that caught him off guard. Most people would have scrambled to comply, especially under the weight of his glare. But she didn't budge. Instead, she pulled out her phone and showed him the confirmation email from the airline, complete with her name and seat number. "I'm sorry if there's been some confusion," she added, her voice steady. "But unless you can prove otherwise, I think I'll stay right here." For a moment, the man stood frozen, unsure how to respond. Was she serious? Did she really think she could challenge him? He tried again, raising his voice just enough to make his displeasure clear. "Look, I don't know what's going on, but I suggest you move to economy. You're causing unnecessary delays." That's when things took an unexpected turn. Instead of backing down, the woman smiled, a small, knowing smile that made him uneasy. "You may want to reconsider your approach," she said softly, almost as if she were letting him in on a secret. Then leaning forward slightly, she added, "I'm not just any passenger." Confusion flickered across his face. Before he could ask what she meant, she introduced herself. Her name wasn't important, but her credentials certainly were. She revealed that she was an aerospace engineer, a former military pilot, and currently a consultant working with federal aviation authorities. In other words, she knew more about airplanes than most people ever would, including the intricacies of airline policies and passenger rights. The man blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. This wasn't part of the script. People weren't supposed to stand up to him like this. They weren't supposed to counter his authority with expertise and poise. For the first time in years, he found himself questioning whether he was in the right. As tension crackled between them, curious glances from nearby passengers began to weigh heavily on the atmosphere. Some whispered among themselves, while others watched silently, sensing that something unusual was unfolding. Little did they know, this seemingly minor disagreement was about to spiral into something far bigger, something that would disrupt not only this flight, but also the egos and assumptions of everyone involved. The tension between the man and the woman at the first-class seat was thick enough to cut with a knife. Passengers nearby couldn't help but eavesdrop, their eyes darting back and forth as if they were watching a live tennis match. The man, visibly frustrated, tried to regain control of the situation by calling over an airline representative. He gestured sharply toward the attendant, his voice rising just enough to make it clear he wasn't used to being challenged, or ignored. "Listen," he said, addressing the attendant while shooting a pointed look at the seated woman. "This is ridiculous. Fix this immediately. I have a first-class ticket and I expect to be treated accordingly." The attendant, caught in the middle of what was quickly becoming a public spectacle, fumbled with her tablet, stammering through an explanation. "Sir, we're looking into it. There must have been a mistake when the reservations were processed. We'll sort it out right away." But the woman didn't wait for them to finish bickering. She closed her book calmly, placing it on the tray table beside her, and stood up, not to leave but to address the growing crowd herself. Her presence commanded attention without effort. There was something about the way she carried herself that made people stop and listen. "I understand this is frustrating for everyone," she began, her tone measured but firm. "However, let's not lose sight of the facts here. My boarding pass clearly states this is my assigned seat. If there's been an error, it's on the airline's end, not mine." She paused, glancing briefly at the flustered attendant before turning her focus back to the man. "And while I respect your position, raising your voice won't resolve anything. What we need is clarity, not confrontation." Her words hung in the air, silencing the murmurs around them. For a moment, even the man seemed taken aback. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. There was no hostility in her voice, only logic and calmness. Yet beneath her composed exterior there was an undeniable undercurrent of authority. This wasn't someone who would back down easily. Unwilling to concede, the man doubled down. "I don't care whose fault it is," he snapped, his patience wearing thin. "What I do care about is getting what I paid for. And if you're so confident in your claim, maybe you should explain why a simple seating mix-up has turned into such a scene." The woman crossed her arms, tilting her head slightly as though considering his challenge. Then, with a small smile playing on her lips, she replied, "Fair enough. Let me clarify something for you, and for everyone else listening." She took a step forward, ensuring all eyes were on her. "This isn't just about a seat, it's about accountability. Airlines are supposed to follow protocols and passengers deserve transparency. If mistakes happen, they need to own up to them instead of shifting blame onto customers." Her gaze shifted momentarily to the airline staff, who looked increasingly uncomfortable under her scrutiny. "Now, I'm more than happy to move to another seat, if it's confirmed that I've been reassigned incorrectly. But until then, I'll stay exactly where I am, because it's my right to do so." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Some nodded approvingly, impressed by her poise and reasoning. Others exchanged skeptical glances, unsure whether to side with her or the clearly agitated man. Tensions escalated further when the man decided to play his trump card. "Do you have any idea who I am?" he demanded, his voice dripping with indignation. "I run a multi-billion-dollar company. I fly first class regularly, and I expect— No, I demand better treatment than this." The comment drew mixed reactions. A few people raised their eyebrows, perhaps recognizing him from news headlines or business magazines. Most, however, seemed unimpressed. In fact, one young woman sitting nearby muttered loudly enough for others to hear, "Money doesn't give you permission to act like a jerk." The seated woman didn't react directly to his boast. Instead, she leaned in slightly, her expression softening ever so subtly. "Let me tell you something," she said quietly, almost conspiratorially. "Your title might open doors, but it doesn't define your character. How you handle situations like this says far more about you than the size of your bank account. For a split second, the man hesitated. There was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, as though her words had struck a nerve. But pride quickly reasserted itself, and he shot back, "Maybe so, but I still deserve answers. And action." At that exact moment, the airline manager arrived, flanked by 2 junior staff members. They approached cautiously, aware that the situation had spiraled beyond a routine seating dispute. After a hushed conversation with the attendant, the manager turned to the man, offering profuse apologies and promising to rectify the issue. Unfortunately for the airline, their attempts to placate him only fueled his frustration. "Apologies aren't enough," he barked. "This kind of incompetence is unacceptable. You're going to hear from my lawyers about this." The threat hung heavy in the air, but it didn't seem to faze the seated woman. Instead, she reached into her bag, pulling out a sleek phone and dialing a number with practiced ease. As the call connected, she spoke confidently, using terms like FAA compliance and safety review. Whatever she was discussing, it was clear she meant business. When she hung up, she addressed the group once more. "Since this airline appears incapable of resolving this matter appropriately, I've initiated an emergency review of their operations. Until further notice, this flight, and likely others, will remain grounded pending investigation." Gasps erupted throughout the terminal. Passengers began exchanging worried looks, some groaning about missed connections while others marveled at the audacity of the announcement. Meanwhile, the man stared at her, dumbfounded. Had she really just grounded an entire plane? "Oh, and one more thing," she added, turning her attention back to him. "As for firing the pilot, well, let's just say I'll leave that decision to the authorities. But rest assured, they'll be hearing from me too." With those final words, she reclaimed her seat, perfectly at ease despite the chaos swirling around her. The man, on the other hand, looked like he'd been punched in the gut. For the first time in years, he realized he might have met his match, and possibly learned a lesson he hadn't seen coming. The announcement that the flight, and potentially others, was grounded sent shockwaves through the terminal. Passengers who had been quietly observing the drama now erupted into a mix of panic, frustration, and disbelief. Some scrambled to check their connections, while others vented their anger at the airline staff, demanding answers. The mood was chaotic, but amidst the chaos, one thing was clear. The woman in first class had just taken control of the situation in a way no one could have anticipated. The man, still standing near her seat, looked like he'd been hit by a truck. His face flushed red, partly from embarrassment and partly from sheer astonishment. How had this escalated so quickly? One moment he was arguing over a seat assignment. The next, an entire plane was grounded because of it. He turned to the airline manager, his voice sharp with accusation. "You're going to let this happen? You're seriously letting her dictate what happens here?" The manager, clearly overwhelmed, stammered out an apology. "Sir, we're doing everything we can to resolve this. Please understand, these things take time." "Time?" the man interrupted, his voice rising. "You think I don't know how this works? This isn't about time, it's about incompetence." He gestured wildly toward the seated woman, as if she were the sole cause of all his problems. She shouldn't even be in that seat in the first place. But the woman didn't flinch. She sat calmly, her posture relaxed yet commanding, as though she had seen this kind of tantrum 100 times before. When she finally spoke, her tone was measured, almost soothing. "Let's not confuse the issue," she said, addressing both the man and the growing crowd. "This isn't about me or my seat, it's about accountability. Airlines are responsible for ensuring that their operations run smoothly and fairly. When they fail to do that, it impacts everyone, not just you or me." Her words resonated with some of the passengers, particularly those who had experienced similar frustrations in the past. A middle-aged man sitting nearby chimed in, nodding vigorously. "She's right, you know. I've been stuck in situations like this before, and it always feels like the airline doesn't care. Maybe it's time someone held them accountable." Others joined in, sharing stories of missed flights, lost luggage, and rude customer service. What started as a confrontation between 2 individuals had morphed into something larger, a collective airing of grievances against an industry that often prioritized profits over people. The man, however, wasn't ready to concede. If anything, the mounting criticism only fueled his defensiveness. "This is absurd," he muttered under his breath, pacing back and forth. "I'm not the bad guy here. I'm just trying to get what I paid for." The woman watched him for a moment, her expression thoughtful. Then, surprising everyone, she stood up again and approached him. "You're right," she said softly, her voice cutting through the noise. "You're not the bad guy. None of us are. But sometimes our actions, or reactions, can make us seem that way." Her unexpected conciliatory tone caught him off guard. For the first time since the argument began, he stopped pacing and met her gaze. "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked, his voice quieter now, tinged with curiosity rather than anger. "It means," she continued, "that we all have moments when we let frustration get the better of us. And trust me, I understand where you're coming from. First-class tickets aren't cheap, and you expect a certain level, even if that expectation comes with privilege." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "But privilege doesn't mean entitlement. It means responsibility. Responsibility to lead by example, to treat others with respect, and to recognize that fairness matters more than convenience." The man blinked, processing her words. There was truth in what she was saying, even if it stung to hear it. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, the airline manager returned, looking even more harried than before. "Ma'am," he said, addressing the woman, "we've reviewed the records, and it appears there was indeed a mistake in the seating assignments. We'd like to offer you a complimentary upgrade to another flight, along with additional compensation if you'd be willing to reconsider your decision." It was a desperate attempt to de-escalate the situation, and the man couldn't help but smirk. Surely this would put an end to the madness. But the woman simply shook her head, unfazed. "Compensation won't fix the root problem," she replied. "This isn't about me or my seat anymore. It's about ensuring that policies are followed and passengers are treated fairly. Until I see concrete evidence that this airline is committed to making changes, the review will proceed as planned." Her resolve left the manager speechless. The man, meanwhile, found himself grappling with conflicting emotions. On one hand, he admired her determination. On the other, he resented how it exposed flaws in systems he had always taken for granted. Privately, he wondered whether he'd handled the situation poorly. Had he been too quick to demand his way without considering the bigger picture? As the standoff continued, the woman decided to take matters into her own hands. She pulled out her phone once more and began drafting emails and messages, reaching out to contacts within federal aviation authorities and advocacy groups. Her fingers flew across the screen, typing with precision and purpose. Every call she made, every message she sent, reinforced her credibility and influence. It became increasingly clear that she wasn't bluffing. This was someone who knew exactly how to navigate complex systems and hold powerful entities accountable. Watching her work, the man felt a strange mix of admiration and envy. He had spent years building his empire, amassing wealth and power. Yet here she was, wielding authority in a completely different way. Where his influence came from money and status, hers stemmed from expertise, integrity, and a deep sense of justice. For the first time, he questioned whether his version of success was truly fulfilling or sustainable. The tension reached its peak when the FAA representative arrived, summoned by the woman's earlier call. Dressed in a crisp uniform, the official carried an air of authority that silenced the room instantly. After a brief conversation with the woman, during which she outlined her concerns and provided supporting documentation, the representative turned to the airline staff. "We'll need full access to your records," he said sternly. "And until we complete our review, this flight remains grounded." The finality of his statement left no room for argument. The airline employees scurried to comply, while passengers exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to feel relieved or outraged. The man, however, seemed oddly subdued. As the reality of the situation sank in, He realized that this wasn't just about a seat anymore. It was about principles, values, and the kind of world he wanted to live in. For the first time, he allowed himself to consider the possibility that maybe, just maybe, he had something to learn from the woman who had grounded the plane. As the FAA representative took charge of the situation, the terminal buzzed with a mix of anticipation and unease. Passengers who had initially been annoyed by the delay were now glued to the unfolding drama, whispering among themselves about what might happen next. Some admired the woman's boldness while others wondered if she had gone too far. But one thing was undeniable. This wasn't just an ordinary seating dispute anymore. It had become a lesson in accountability, fairness, and the power dynamics at play in everyday life. The man, still standing near the first-class cabin, looked visibly shaken. His earlier confidence had crumbled under the weight of the situation. For years he had operated in environments where his wealth and influence could smooth over any obstacle. He was used to people bending to his will, not challenging it. Yet, here he was, face to face with someone who refused to back down. And worse, someone whose actions exposed flaws in systems he had always trusted to work in his favor. The woman noticed the shift in his demeanor. Gone was the sharp-edged frustration. Instead, there was a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. Sensing an opening, she decided to approach him again, not as an adversary, but as someone willing to bridge the gap between them. "Can we talk?" she asked softly, gesturing toward a quieter corner of the terminal. He hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Together, they stepped away from the crowd, finding a spot near a row of empty seats. The noise of the terminal faded into the background as they sat down across from each other. For the first time since their confrontation began, the tension between them eased slightly. "I know you're upset," she started, her tone gentle but firm. "And I get it. You paid for a service and you expected it to be delivered without hassle. No one likes feeling disrespected or ignored." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's not just about the seat," he admitted, surprising even himself. "I mean, yes, that's part of it. But," he trailed off, struggling to put his feelings into words. "It's like I'm used to things going my way. When they don't, it feels personal, like the world is conspiring against me." She nodded thoughtfully, letting him finish. "That's understandable," she said. "But have you ever stopped to think about why things usually go your way? It's not just because you've worked hard or earned it, though I'm sure you have. Sometimes, it's also because of privilege." The word hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. He frowned, leaning forward slightly. "Privilege? What do you mean?" "It means," she explained patiently, "that some doors open more easily for you than they do for others. Not because you're better or worse, but because of factors beyond your control, like your background, your resources, or even how people perceive you based on appearances." She paused, giving him time to absorb her words. Privilege isn't inherently bad. It's just something to be aware of. Because when you're not aware of it, it can make you blind to the struggles of others. He stared at her, his mind racing. He had heard the term before, of course, but it had always felt abstract, like something discussed in boardrooms or diversity trainings. Now, sitting across from this woman who embodied resilience and determination, it suddenly felt real, tangible, uncomfortable. "Look," she continued, softening her tone, "this isn't about blaming you or making you feel guilty. It's about understanding, about recognizing that fairness doesn't come naturally. It has to be fought for. And sometimes that fight starts with moments like this." Her honesty struck a chord deep within him. For years, he had prided himself on being a self-made success story. He had built his empire from the ground up, overcoming obstacles and proving doubters wrong at every turn. But now, faced with someone who had clearly overcome far greater challenges, he realized how narrow his perspective had been. Success wasn't just about climbing ladders, it was about lifting others along the way. "Guess I haven't thought about it that way," he admitted quietly. "I mean, I've always believed in meritocracy. If you work hard enough, you'll get ahead. End of story." She smiled faintly, shaking her head. If only it were that simple. Hard work matters, absolutely. But so does opportunity. So does support. So does having systems in place that treat everyone fairly, regardless of who they are or where they come from. Her words lingered in his mind, sparking a chain reaction of thoughts and emotions. He thought about the employees in his company, the ones who worked tirelessly behind the scenes, often without recognition. He thought about the communities his business touched, both positively and negatively. And he thought about his own life, the privileges he had taken for granted without realizing it. "You're right," he said finally, his voice tinged with humility. "I've been blind to a lot of things. Maybe this whole situation is a wake-up call." The woman nodded approvingly. "Growth starts with awareness," she said. "And trust me, I've been where you are. We all have blind spots. It's part of being human. The key is being willing to see them and do something about it." Their conversation shifted then, moving away from the immediate conflict and toward broader topics. She shared stories from her own life, about growing up in a neighborhood where opportunities were scarce, about facing discrimination in male-dominated fields, and about fighting for change in industries resistant to progress. Her experiences painted a vivid picture of resilience and perseverance, leaving him both humbled and inspired. In return, he opened up about his own journey, the sacrifices he had made, the risks he had taken, and the fears that drove him to cling so tightly to control. As they talked, the initial animosity between them dissolved, replaced by mutual respect and understanding. They weren't so different after all, he realized. Both had worked hard to get where they were. Both wanted to make a difference in the world. The difference lay in how they chose to wield their power. By the time they returned to the gate area, the atmosphere had changed. The FAA representative had completed his preliminary assessment, confirming that the airline had indeed violated several policies. While the investigation would continue, the immediate crisis was resolved. The plane was cleared for departure once seating assignments were corrected. Passengers cheered faintly, eager to finally board after hours of delay. Before parting ways, the man extended his hand to the woman. "Thank you," he said sincerely, "for everything. I may not agree with all your methods, but I respect your principles, and I owe you an apology for how I acted earlier and for not seeing the bigger picture." She accepted his handshake with a warm smile. "Apology accepted. Just remember, change starts with small steps. Keep pushing yourself to grow, and you'll be amazed at what you can achieve." As they boarded the plane separately, the man couldn't help but reflect on the day's events. What had started as a trivial disagreement had turned into a profound learning experience, one that challenged his assumptions and forced him to confront uncomfortable truths. And though the flight ahead promised turbulence, he knew the real journey was just beginning. The plane finally took off, soaring into the sky as passengers settled into their seats, some still buzzing about the events that had unfolded earlier. For many, it was a story they would recount for years, a tale of power, privilege, and the unexpected ways life can teach us lessons when we least expect them. But for the man and the woman at the center of it all, the day's events left an indelible mark, one that would ripple far beyond the confines of the aircraft. As the flight progressed, the man found himself staring out the window, lost in thought. The clouds stretched endlessly below him, but his mind was preoccupied with the conversation he'd had with the woman. Her words replayed in his head like a loop. Privilege isn't inherently bad, but it's something to be aware of. Awareness. That simple yet profound concept had shaken him to his core. For so long he had equated success with control over outcomes, over people, over situations. But now he realized that true leadership wasn't about domination, it was about understanding others, understanding systems, and most importantly, understanding himself. He pulled out his laptop, deciding to put pen to paper, or rather, fingers to keyboard. Typing furiously, he drafted an email to his executive team back at headquarters. In it, he outlined a bold new initiative aimed at fostering inclusivity and equity within the company. He proposed creating mentorship programs for underrepresented groups, revising hiring practices to eliminate biases, and investing in communities impacted by the company's operations. It wasn't just lip service. It was a genuine attempt to translate what he had learned into action. Meanwhile, the woman sat quietly in her seat, flipping through the pages of her book. Occasionally, she glanced up, catching snippets of conversations around her. Some passengers were still talking about the incident, marveling at how she had stood her ground. Others were simply relieved to finally be on their way. She smiled faintly, knowing that while the day's drama might fade from memory for most, its impact would linger. For her, for the man, and perhaps even for the airline itself. When the plane landed, the two disembarked separately, each heading in different directions. Yet, despite the physical distance between them, their paths remained intertwined. The man returned to his office with renewed purpose, determined to implement the changes he had outlined in his email. His team initially raised eyebrows at the sudden shift in priorities, but as he explained his reasoning, with vulnerability and conviction, they began to see the value in his vision. Slowly but surely, the culture of the company started to evolve, becoming more inclusive and forward-thinking. The woman, on the other hand, continued her work with federal aviation authorities, using the incident as a case study to advocate for stricter enforcement of passenger rights. Her efforts gained traction, leading to workshops and seminars where she shared her expertise with industry leaders. She became a voice for accountability, urging airlines to prioritize transparency and fairness above profit margins. Her influence extended beyond policy reform. It inspired countless individuals who had felt marginalized or overlooked in their own lives. Word of the incident spread far and wide, thanks in part to social media posts from passengers who had witnessed the showdown firsthand. News outlets picked up the story, framing it not as a clash of egos but as a powerful reminder of the importance of empathy and integrity. People admired the woman's courage and the man's willingness to listen and grow. Together, they became symbols of what could happen when conflict gave way to collaboration, and when privilege met responsibility. Months later, the man received an invitation to speak at a conference focused on corporate social responsibility. At first, he hesitated, unsure if he was ready to share his journey publicly. But then he remembered the woman's advice. Change starts with small steps. With that in mind, he accepted the invitation and prepared a speech that was equal parts reflection and call to action. On stage, he spoke candidly about the day his world turned upside down. The day he realized that success wasn't just about climbing higher, but also about lifting others along the way. To his surprise, the audience responded with overwhelming support. Afterward, several attendees approached him, thanking him for his honesty and asking for guidance on implementing similar changes in their own organizations. One person in particular caught his attention, a young professional who reminded him of his younger self, ambitious, driven, and hungry for success. As they talked, he found himself passing along the same wisdom the woman had shared with him. Success without empathy is hollow. True growth comes from recognizing your blind spots and doing something about them. Back in her corner of the world, the woman watched clips of the man's speech online. A sense of pride swelled within her, not because she had changed him, but because he had chosen to change himself. She knew that real progress wasn't made overnight, nor was it the result of one person's efforts alone. It was a collective endeavor, requiring patience, persistence, and partnership. And so, the story came full circle. What had begun as a disagreement over a seat assignment had transformed into a catalyst for change, a testament to the power of dialogue, accountability, and human connection. Neither the man nor the woman sought recognition for their roles in the unfolding drama. They didn't need it. The proof of their impact was written in the lives they touched and the systems they helped reshape. As the man boarded another flight months later, this time without incident, he couldn't help but smile. Somewhere out there, the woman was likely doing the same, continuing her mission to make the skies and the world a little fairer, a little kinder, and a lot more just. Their paths may never cross again, but the legacy of their encounter would endure. reminding everyone who heard the story that even in moments of conflict there lies the potential for transformation.